I'm going to go through the simple steps of creating the somewhat traditional technique of allowing large text to be readable on a busy background without sacrificing your visual. I'm going to start out with bringing up my layers palette. I've already got the type in place. What I'm going to do first, I'm going to create a new layer. On this layer, I'm going to create a rectangular marquee, and I'm going to use this as my backdrop to allow my text to be more easily readable. And I'm going to sample a background color here that's somewhat of a darker brown. I'm going to fill that selection with the foreground color. Once I have that centered, I can now continue to the next step. Now, traditionally, what's been done is with this rectangle filled with that dark brown color, I could actually go to the blending mode and select multiply, which will multiply the contrast of the pixels in the underlying layer, and then we'll simply lower the opacity. Okay, this is certainly workable, but I want to show you an alternate method. I'm going to leave my opacity at 100% for now, and I'm going to double click on the layer to access the layer style dialog box, and I'm going to select drop shadow. In the drop shadow dialog box, I want to make sure that the light source matches the image. So my light source in this case is coming from the upper right. I'm going to base the light source on that in the drop shadow. Okay, the next step is I'm going to apply a gradient overlay. So I'm going to select the gradient overlay name to access the settings for the gradient overlay. And I'm going to click on the actual gradient because I want to change the colors of the gradient. So I'm going to click, and that will bring up the gradient editor. So what we see here are color stoppers on this gradient here. And we want to change the colors of these, and you do that by double clicking on each color stopper. And that will give you access to the color picker dialog box. Once you're in this dialog box, if you bring your cursor outside of the dialog box, you'll see that you have access to your eyedropper tool, which will allow you to color sample anything on your image. I'll stick with that color and you get instant results in the window here. We'll stick with that for the darker color. And now I'm going to change the color of the top portion of the gradient, which is the white, by double clicking on the color stopper, and I'll sample this bright yellow up here, and we see the results reflected here in the document. And I'm going to make that yellow a little brighter by dragging this to the upper right hand corner, and I will now hit OK and accept this gradient by hitting OK again. And now what I'll do is work with the blending mode in the gradient overlay by clicking on the drop-down menu, and you can now scroll through to see which blend mode will work best by hitting your down arrow key. So I'll just simply click down, 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 and I'm looking at the results as we scrub through here. I think that looks interesting there. Okay, keep in mind that we do have more controls here. We can lessen the intensity of this, but let's leave this as is because we can always go back to it. So I'm going to hit OK to accept that. We have other options here. We can also lower the opacity or intensity of this, which will allow us to see more through, which will allow for more transparency. And now the next step is we're going to go in here and select the layer that the text is actually on here, and I'm going to duplicate that. Control J will duplicate the text layer. I'm going to hide my top layer, go to my bottom layer, make that active, and go to my text tool. I'm going to highlight all the text on that layer and change that color to black. Okay, so we have black as the underlying color for the text. And then on top of that, once I make my text visible, we have white. So with the bottom layer active and the move tool selected, I'm going to hit my down arrow key to off-center the text. A few hits down and then a little bit over to the left to further give the illusion of another drop shadow. The next step is we can now apply a highlight along the top rim of this box. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to go to my pencil tool. I'm going to hit D for my default black foreground, white background, and X to swap them. I'm going to create a 2-pixel line. I think this should work fine. So here's what I'm going to do. On the new layer, I'm going to very carefully click and drag to the right, and as I'm dragging, I'm holding down my shift key to constrain that horizontal slide and let go when I get to the end here. I'm now going to click and drag down and continue to hold down my shift key. When I get to the end, I'm letting go with my cursor first and then the Shift key. And there we go. We have something that looks pretty nice, and it's also keeping our text readable, and it also is not sacrificing any of the background visual. The last thing I'd like to do is work with the author. I'm going to drag him up here, apply a layer style to this, double click on that layer, and I'll select drop shadow. And I'll also select a color overlay. By default, the color overlay option comes up as being red. I'm going to click on that color window and sample the bright yellow of the background here. I'm going to make that a brighter yellow. I can always play around with the colors in here. So I'll hit OK to that. Hit OK to those settings. Now I'll simply scale this down by hitting Control T. I'll scale it down. I'm hitting Shift as I'm dragging from the corner inward. I'm letting go with my mouse and then letting go with the Shift key and hitting Enter to apply the transformation. I'm going to do one more thing. This font is a particularly favorite font of mine called Trajan Pro. However, it does not come in an italicized version. So one quick method of shearing this or italicizing it is if I hit Control T and then hold down my Control key, I'm going to click on the top center bounding box and drag a little bit to the right. I'm again holding down my Shift key. If you don't hold down the Shift key, you can distort it in this manner. So I'm going to let go with my mouse and then let go of the Shift and Control and hit Enter to apply that, and that's the end result. So I hope you guys got some value from this, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.